go ahead and get started again. I'm going to turn it over to the applicant to present its. You had a comment there, Mr. Haney?
I do.
Okay.
I understand that the appellant has rested at this point, and there were a number of different issues that were raised in the SEPA appeal, but that don't appear to have evidence that have been presented on them. So I wanted to address those. The SEPA appeal, the first issue was that the SEPA decision was made with missing, partial, or inaccurate information regarding Chinook salmon. I didn't hear any testimony to support that in the testimony. Supposedly it was made with missing information regarding the importance of intermittent streams to fish habitat. I didn't hear any testimony regarding intermittent versus year-round streams.
Do you want us to respond to these one at a time?
Just wait.
Go through the whole list.
There was one of the issues was whether an infiltration structure construction and maintenance impacts were considered. I haven't heard any testimony regarding any infiltration structure. A flow spreader is not an infiltration structure. The issue also, another issue is the proposal did not show how impact to sensitive areas could have been avoided. I didn't hear any testimony regarding that. I do see that there's obviously testimony about environmental impacts concerning stormwater quantities and habitat values. There's testimony regarding whether an EIS should be prepared. I don't know that requires testimony. It's more of a legal argument. And lastly, that there is a likely take of Chinook salmon and endangered species. And I didn't really hear that there was a likely take. At least I didn't hear that from the witness. So those issues which I say we didn't hear testimony on, I believe should be dismissed. And the issues should be limited to the testimony we heard.
So you're essentially, this is a halftime motion to dismiss issues 1, 2, 4, and 5, essentially,
yes,
of the SEPA appeal. I assume, Mr. Knoll, you would join in this motion?
I would.
Okay. I will let you respond, Mr. Brickley.
Great. Well, some of those we don't have any problem with. I mean, as I outlined in our opening statement, the gist of our argument is that the MD&S was inadequate for two reasons. One, that even as mitigated, there are still going to be significant impacts for the two reasons that Mr. Taylor addressed, the loss of the buffer function and the impacts from the level spreader. And then the second reason being that the city lacked adequate information to evaluate those issues. The way the issues were framed in the notice of appeal did not always jive with those arguments, but the council just said that he did not hear any evidence regarding intermittent use of the creek. Well, to the contrary, I heard the witness testify about the value of the creek even though it goes dry in the summer, and that there are still pools there that fish can survive in. And further, that even if it were entirely dry in the summer, the fact that it's intermittent doesn't impact the fact that the rest of the year it's providing valuable habitat, and the riparian zone next to it is providing valuable habitat, and impacting that riparian zone matters a lot, even if it is intermittent. So there was a lot of testimony about that.
I guess the thinking, what I'm trying to parse this too, is the way that it's phrased is that there was somehow inaccurate science about the importance of intermittent streams that was involved in the SEPA decision. I'm not sure I heard any testimony specific to the idea that there was some sort of bad science that was used. I certainly heard testimony from Mr. Taylor on the importance of intermittent streams for purposes of habitat value.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, and I guess maybe think of that more as an affirmative defense, because if the respondents are going to argue in their case that the creek, that the impacts of the creek are less because it's an intermittent creek, then that issue's still going to be part. So I guess I'm seeing that more as a defensive move on our part, not something in our case in chief. As to the issue of avoidance, that there was greater mitigation that could have been employed. Again, I guess in a way that's not, I don't view that as a necessary part of our case, Chief. The point is not what any additional mitigation would be, but rather whether the mitigation that's been imposed was adequate to reduce impacts still less than significant. And I guess I would view it as somewhat extraneous in the notice of appeal as to whether what the specific additional mitigation could have been or should be. So, and then as to the issue that was framed in terms of that there was a take of Chinook, I would agree that whether there was an ESA violation is not a element of a SEPA claim. But I just want to make clear that's not to say that the existence of Chinook in that stream or tributary and creek and the impact of the project on Chinook is certainly of great significance to the SEPA issue. It's just not being framed as an ESA take issue.
Sure. I guess the way I always think about these SEPA appeals is that, you know, you raise specific issues, but the ultimate underlying issue is whether or not the city erred in making the determination it made. So, you know, whether we go through and we line item cross out specific items, I'm not sure how necessary it is. I mean, the evidence presented by the appellant is what it is. It's clearly their burden. Are you worried that, Mr. Haney, that you have specific witnesses you were going to call to contradict certain things?
Right. I want to make sure that, and I tried to clarify that with Mr. Taylor, exactly what the issues were. And there are a number of things here that were mentioned in the notice of appeal that simply don't appear to be issues that testimony was taken on.
Right.
For example, again, I mean, the appeal is much more detailed than I was actually looking at this from your pre-hearing order, but the appeal is much more detailed. It says that the SEPA decision was made with missing, partial, or inaccurate information. Chinook salmon, endangered species, was not identified on the SEPA checklist. There was no testimony about that. B, the science on the importance of intermittent streams to fish habitat was inaccurate, but there was no mention here of what science we're talking about that the city used that was inaccurate, as you said. C, the infiltration structure, construction, and maintenance were not considered as impacts, and there is no infiltration structure. There was infiltration in the project originally, as I understand it. There was proposed infiltration, but there is no infiltration proposed now, and as I understand it.
I get where you're going, Mr. Haney. I guess what's your ultimate goal here?
The ultimate goal is to narrow the issues and to dismiss those issues on which no testimony has been presented. And what I heard the issues to be is that they fall within number 3 on the appeal, which likely impacts to the environment were not described or were inaccurately represented in the quantity of stormwater being put into the tributary and North Fork and on habitat values. Those are the issues that I heard. So it really appears to me, and I guess number 4, the project's impacts are sufficiently significant to require preparation of an EIS. So it looks to me like issues 3 and 4 are really what I heard testimony about in this appeal, and that should be, the rest of the issues should be dismissed.
But, I mean, I guess
or a directed verdict, I guess, is what I'm looking for.
Well, again, with SEPA, I'm ultimately determining whether or not the city erred in issuing an MD&S. I mean, the issues are just what get us into the room. Clearly, there was not testimony on some of these specific issues. I guess I'm, you know, if no evidence was presented in the course of me producing my decision, I think that'll be noted. But it's just a foundation for whether or not the city erred. You know, I'm not going to make a decision on 17 issues in every single SEPA appeal.
Right, but the reason that I think it's important
Okay.
is so that I don't have to call any witnesses relating to any
Well, that
of
was
these
my
other
question a
matters.
minute ago,
Yes.
and you did not respond that way. So, to the extent that, we didn't hear, well, first off, some of these are very sort of straightforward factual issues. We did hear testimony about the potential for endangered species in the stream, did we not?
We heard that the potential for endangered species, but the specific issues and the Issaquah Code is in the hearing examiner's rules are that you can present testimony and you can argue issues that you brought in your appeal, not that you use these as a way in the door and then you can argue anything
Well,
that
true,
you can.
but it's also not code pleading. I mean, we. So let me ask you, Mr. Haney, which of these issues? So right now, I guess we're going to go through them one by one rather than just. This is why I hate halftime motions, but we're moving on it. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Can I propose
Please propose something.
something? Can we agree that the two issues that are being presented are only the two issues that were identified?
That Mr. Brooklyn said these are my two issues.
Just those two issues?
Yes.
Can we agree on that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Moving.
Is that-
Those are the issues. Okay.
So we don't, and on agreeing on those two issues, anything that isn't directly related to those, we do not have to present evidence
The
on.
burden has never been yours for either the applicant or the city. So, I guess it's a leap of faith. You'll have to trust that I know whose burden it is, and that if no evidence is presented on an issue, that they're not going to win on that issue. So I'm asking you to take that leap of faith.
I trust you, Mr. Examiner.
Thank you, Mr. Haney.
I am willing to make the leap of faith.
Okay.
Good move.
That said, does that mean you're withdrawing any halftime motion that has been presented, or did you want some kind of ruling?
No, I will simply note it, and the hearing examiner's statement is satisfactory.
All right, thank you. Okay, so with that, then, we will move to the city's witnesses. Did you have a brief opening?
Applicant.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I know. I'm looking right at you when I say it, too.
It seems to be an error made by everybody. I
Yes.
think in some of Mr. Brickland's pleadings, he referred to
Oh,
our
applicant.
motions, which in
Right.
fact were the applicant's
Right,
motions, so.
So, that said, did you have any brief opening remarks?
Yeah, just a very brief opening remark, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that. There's been two issues that have been presented. One is this habitat for invertebrates. It was very obvious that in presenting the information, they didn't compare, all they did was compare paving over the entire lot to not paving over the lot. And they didn't take into consideration any of the plantings that would be done, the value of those plantings, what kind of plantings, whether they would help the invertebrate population, and the plantings, and how it would address the level spreader issue. So we will be presenting information on that. And then the other issue is the level spreader. It was also fairly clear that while he had general objections to the level spreader, he didn't have much specific information regarding water flow on the site currently, how it pools, where it goes, how fast it is, and we will be presenting information on that that will show that the level spreader is light years ahead of what is currently happening on the site. With that, I'll call my first witness.
Okay, and who would that be?
That would be Mark Garf.
Mark Garf. All right. And thank you for being here, Mr. Garf. Do you swear affirm to tell the truth in the testimony you give here today?
I do.
Great, thank you.
Gerard, sorry about giving you neck pain. You can not look at me and just look at him the whole time to
Or
ease
just
that.
stare into the distance, whatever's easiest for you.
Could you give me a brief summary of your occupation?
Yes. I'm a licensed landscape architect. I've been in practice for 21 years. Been licensed for, I believe, 17 of those years. And I provide landscape architecture for commercial, residential, urban and rural projects all over the state. And I guess that's it.
And who do you work for?
I work for SCJ Alliance.
And how did you come to participate in this project?
The client approached us about assisting with the development of the site, and we wanted to help out, and so we put together landscape plans for all of the areas on site, both ornamental landscaping around the dealership, streetscape, and also the habitat areas along North Creek.
And in your work as a landscape architect, have you been involved in designing landscaping to mitigate the environmental impact from a project?
Yes, many times.
Okay. And what are the key components of doing that?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about degraded site. Typically, you would take a site that does not have what's considered good habitat, and this is specifically about mitigation that we're talking about. And you would try and increase the habitat value, increase the functions and values of the site, and that's typically through invasive weed removal, amending the soil, and planting native plants. And typically, you would plant native plants in layers, so you'd have a ground cover layer, a shrub layer, and a tree layer.
I want to ask you about those in a minute, but let's talk about the current status of the site. What is your opinion about the current status of the site and its ability to provide plant life?
It's currently a grassy field that has been heavily compacted over time by both storage of bulk materials, machinery, and it has a layer of it's called quarry spalls, gravel, and it's essentially a grassy field with invasive weeds at the margins, and then then there's the restored portion of North Creek, which is in good shape.
And the restored portion was done by WSDOT?
Correct.
They changed the creek?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there gravel in the field?
Yes. Yeah, there's quite a bit of gravel. Large and small, the soil is heavily compacted, and typically that is not great for growing the type of plant material that would be considered good habitat.
And when you're talking about habitat, are you all talking about habitat not only for animals and fish, but also for macroinvertebrants?
Correct.
And what is the best habitat for macroinvertebrants?
It would be a habitat where there are more species than just simply grass. I would call the current state of the site, it's more like a monoculture in that there's only one type of material growing out there, whereas in good habitat you would have trees, shrubs, ground cover, different types of species, woody species and herbaceous species, which is lacking on the site currently.
Okay. And I'd ask you to look at B14.
Yes.
Is that when I ask you about the ability of the field to support macroinvertebrants, is that an article you sent me?
Yes, it is.
And what is relevant about that article?
I'm sorry, what was the exhibit number?
B14.
It's an article from the National Science Foundation where they studied 6 different sites across the United States, looking specifically at how areas of turf grass, lawns, are considered a monoculture, and how there is a decreased habitat in those spaces. The point of the article was that where there are these lawn areas and then adjacent to another lawn area and adjacent to another lawn area like you have in suburbia, it's not providing quality habitat that would support macroinvertebrants.
And Why do you feel that like that article is relevant to the site that we're talking about?
We have a heavily compacted grassy area with invasive weeds on our site currently. And this article is about lawn areas which are typically compacted and composed of one or two grass species. So in that sense, it's very similar in that it's not biodiverse. Biodiverse meaning it has very few different types of species.
You heard Mr. Taylor say that there was natural vegetation of grass. How do you believe the grass came to be about on this field?
I think the site was hydroseeded by WashDOT after they demobilized. What that means is typically they would spray a grass seed mix, an erosion control mix out there just to cover the site.
And how would that relate to a monoculture?
It's composed of 2, 3, or 4 species of grass, sometimes clover, and it doesn't have any trees, shrubs, or ground cover in the mix. It's just grass.
When you came up with the plantings along the North Fork and along the border between the site and the ditch, did you design plants that would support macroinvertebrates?
Specifically along the tributary?
Yeah, along the North Fork.
Oh, so along the North Fork of Issaquah Creek?
Yeah, specifically along the North Fork.
So along the North Fork of Issaquah Creek, we have where WashDOT did not do their planting. Beyond that, we are planting a mix of trees, shrubs, and ground cover. And
Can I help you out here?
yeah.
Turn to B9.
Sorry, what is the exhibit number again?
Yeah, so what's
B9.
B9, but what's the B9? Because you can't.
Did you get the notebook?
So he's looking at
What page number are you on?
12 of 13.
Sheet 12 of 13 of the landscape plan.
So, E9 is a 46 page.
No,
So it starts with
Nine.
1 through 8, and then it'll switch to 1 through 13. So it's 12 of 13, I
Yeah.
believe, of the second grouping there, Mr. Griffin.
and it's a,
So specifically, we have a mix of.
well, hold on, let them catch up. But
Oh, okay.
what it is
Can you show
a-
me what page?
it's a legend of the type of plants that are going to be
All right.
planted.
I don't have it, but I'll find it.
So specifically, it's a mix of native trees, shrubs, and ground cover, which would characterize a more natural area.
Okay. And does your plant cover that you're talking about along the North Fork of Issaquah Creek, does it have those 3 layers that you're talking about
It will when we plant it.
when you finish it?
Mhm.
And will that be a substantial improvement of what's there now?
Yes, absolutely.
And will that substantially improve a habitat for macroinvertebrates?
Yes, it will.
And why do you say that?
It's macroinvertebrates are more supported by a diverse area of planting rather than just a single type of plant.
And what are you doing to the soil before you plant?
Before we plant, we will decompact the soil, and then we typically amend with compost and topsoil, and so it will be a more friable surface. So more plants will be able to grow better.
When you say friable, does that just mean grow better?
Yeah, well, friable means that the soil is broken up.
Okay. Let's talk about the area. There is an area between the parking lot or the end of the construction site and the ditch.
Yes.
The 20-foot area. Is there a depiction of the plantings that will occur along that area?
Yes, we do have some planting along that narrow.
Some plantings where?
Along the narrow.
What he said.
The narrow area is what
The
he said.
narrow area, all right. And what page are you looking at?
It's right here on page 4.
Page 4 of 13.
So,
And those are hard to read. They are easier to read in 11 by 13. I apologize. But there's.
so, okay, I just want to, so is this planting,
Can
I have.
yeah, you're right.
yeah. I mean, a lot of them look the same. Yeah, all right, I think they're the same.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
In the narrow area you're discussing, is that the south, is this what we're talking about right here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
So
that,
There's an area.
okay, we're all on the same page.
There's
Okay.
an area available for planting between the property line and the parking lot.
And are you maintaining that same 3-level natural type plantings in that area?
No, we are not.
And what are you planting in that area?
We're planting shrubs in that area for the most part.
Okay. And are you augmenting the soil there?
Yes, we are.
And are you doing ground cover there?
In that area, no, we are just planting shrubs.
Okay. And are those shrubs going to be more conducive to macroinvertebrates than the current grass field?
I would say so, yes.
And why would you say that?
Woody debris species, they senesce, as Mr. Taylor testified to. They drop leaves. They have flowers in the spring and fruits in the summer.
And can you identify the location where the level spreader will be there?
Yeah. So on this set of plans for this exhibit, the level spreader is not shown. It is.
Can you
This is at the
point
top.
to?
It's right.
So they're just talking about
Not this is the-
Does it run,
Parallel with the
It
property.
runs
well,
par-
which makes sense, but here, can you mark it on, and let's make sure Mr. Brooksman can see as well. On this particular plan, you're saying the level spreader will be right there. That's your understanding? Okay, thank you.
And when you made your plan, or created the plan for vegetation in that area, did you take the level spreader into account?
On subsequent plans, this
Okay.
set of plans was before the level spreader was
Okay.
proposed.
And we have a copy of a subsequent plan.
Which I think is more relevant to.
It's almost that whole-
I'm sorry. That's- Yeah. So is the more subsequent plan Exhibit 16?
Correct.
Sorry, B16?
B16,
B
yes.
is in boy 16.
Yeah.
So this will better illustrate what we're doing in that area.
So if you'll turn to
But sheet
sheet 8 of 13.
8 of 13.
Are you tracking as well, Mr. Brooksman?
Yes, I got
Okay,
this.
great.
Yep, thank you. Appreciate
So
that.
in this area, you can see the level spreader along the edge of the parking lot, and then the area between the level spreader and the property line that's available for planting.
And did you take, in this current design, did you take the level spreader into account in deciding what plants would be planted near the level spreader?
Yes, we did. We did not plant trees there purposely because over time the trees' roots could potentially impact the level spreader. So we planted shrubs instead, which have smaller root systems, so that the level spreader would remain level.
And were you conscious of erosion impacts and trying to prevent that in the plantings also?
Yeah, we planted as many plants in there as we could reasonably fit before we get to the property line.
Okay. Do you have any concerns about the level spreader washing out your plantings?
No. It will be installed correctly and remain level.
And what?
Remain level.
Are you familiar with the plantings in the WASDOT area?
Yes.
And the WASDOT area is along the ditch.
There's a portion of the ditch that they revegetated, yes.
Right. And what is your opinion about the quality and quantity of the plantings in the WASDOT area?
It's actually quite robust. There are a number of trees, shrubs, and ground cover that are I should say trees and shrubs that are thriving in that area. And I've mentioned this before, but it's actually growing quickly and doing quite well.
Are you, as a result of this project, are the number of trees going to increase on this site?
Yes.
And how many trees are you planting?
We are planting if you go to sheet 2 of 13 in this current set. We're planting 36 vine maple, which is the native plant. I'm just going to list the native plants since that's
Sure, great.
That's what we're discussing. We're not discussing the ornamental landscape. 100 bitter cherry, 80 Douglas fir, and 52 western red cedar.
Is that more than are on the site currently?
Yes.
Do the ornamental plantings have a benefit for macroinvertebrates?
They would, yes.
And is there a fair amount of ornamental planting that is taking place on this site?
Yeah, in the areas in the parking lot and in the streetscape, we're planting some ornamental plants.
No further questions.
Mr. Haney, do you have any questions before I turn it over for cross-examination?
I do. Mr. Garf, you testified concerning some of landscape plans that you had prepared. What's the date on those landscape plans?
Which there were
There were two
multiple
different ones.
sets, so.
Let me just ask you,
Okay.
are those landscape plans prepared before October of this year?
Yes.
They were. Okay. Are you familiar with the conditions of approval imposed by the city in the mitigated determination of non-significance regarding landscaping?
I believe I am.
Well, let me direct you, if you would, and I think you have a copy of the city's exhibit book right in
Yeah, I
front
can
of you
help
there.
with.
If you could look at Exhibit C1 and page 4, if you would.
Okay.
And I'm just going to give you a moment to read to yourself. You don't need to read it aloud. Condition 1 and subsection A of that, those conditions.
Okay. I've read A.
Now, Mr. Garf, would you agree with me that condition 1 relates to the adjacent drainage ditch and landscaping that would be adjacent to that?
Yes.
And I direct your attention specifically to subparagraph A and the first sentence. Could you read that first sentence to us?
Adjacent on-site planting areas shall be planted with a mixture of native shrubs and trees in order to provide shading and natural water filtration and ground cover to provide a more structurally complex habitat.
So, Mr. Garf, when you said during your testimony that you were only planting shrubs within this area adjacent to the ditch, this condition would require you to plant trees as well. Is that not correct?
I suppose that is correct, but it would not be advised to plant them in front of the level spreader.
But there would be some trees in that area according to this condition?
Yes, not exactly in front of the level spreader itself.
And this also, I assume that also applies to ground cover. You would be planting ground cover in this adjacent area according to this condition.
We're planting ground cover in the area along the north fork of Issaquah Creek.
Well, this says adjacent on-site planting areas, and I assume this is relating to the ditch. This requires you to plant some ground cover as well in that area.
Objection,
Is that not
Count.
correct?
Hold on. Let me try to understand what's happening. So, you're asking him whether or not essentially that sentence is being satisfied.
Yes.
Okay. What is your objection?
Well, it was that he said, I assumed blah, blah, but I mean, his assumptions are wrong, and he's basically testifying in the guise of.
Okay, again, leap of faith that I'll be able to figure this out.
All right.
So the question really is, do you believe that the first sentence there is being satisfied? Is that a summation?
We can ask it that way if you'd like, Mr. Examiner.
So the condition is that, the question related to A, I mean, he was reading it out.
Let me ask it a different way.
Yeah,
Mr.
please.
Examiner. Mr. Garf, if that first sentence is complied with,
Yes.
will the ground cover and the trees and the native shrubs that are referred to in this sentence, will that provide habitat for macroinvertebrates?
Yes.
So that would be in addition to the habitat provided by the shrubs that you talked about.
Correct.
No further questions for this witness.
And just so I'm fully clear, if I'm looking at these plans, and I look at, one of the ones you had directed my attention toward, that plan set, let's see. Sorry, the way that these printed, it throws me off on the orientation, but the area that we're talking about, so if this is the level spreader, would be, is it here? Yeah, was it here or was it here? It's here, right?
It's right here.
No, it's there. Yeah, okay. Where is the property line end?
It's right there.
Okay, so the plantings that we're talking about would be,
This narrow area right here.
Well,
And then this is
you see these little tiny.
Right.
That's the planting area.
this area is the planting.
Right.
Right.
Well, you're going larger. I mean, this tiny.
Sure,
area.
sure.
Right.
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well, it's not to scale.
Yeah, of course.
Well, it is to scale, but it looks small because everything's shrunk.
So my,
It looks small because it is
guys,
small.
guys, thank you. So my question was, currently there are no plans, just so I understand, to plant anything off-site. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear. Is that,
Well, I think we're on the same page, but just let me make sure.
Okay.
One of the conditions is that they contribute to a tree fund that provides for plantings off-site. I'm assuming that's not what you're asking.
that was not my question, yeah.
Yeah, we do not have permission from WASDOT to
That-
plant in their property.
Right, okay. That's just, I wanted to be sure about that. Okay, great. Now, I will turn it over for cross-examination, Mr. President.
You done?
Yes.
So some of your testimony, good morning, sir. My name's Dave Bricklin, and as you know, I'm representing the Issaquah Environmental Council. Thank you for coming in today. And some of your testimony wasn't always clear, at least to me, when you were describing the plantings that were going to be done, whether you were talking about plantings along the North Fork of the creek or along the tributary. So I want to try to clarify that. And in fact, so when you were talking, for instance, about planting bitter cherries and firs and red cedars, those are over by the North Fork, right?
Correct.
None of that going in along this narrow little strip along the tributary, correct?
Correct.
How narrow is that narrow strip?
It varies, but it's between 10 and down to 5 feet.
The planting strip? And currently in that area, not just that 5 to 10 feet, but further back from the tributary, excuse me, let me start again. The plan calls for 5 to 10 feet of a planting strip, and then further back from the tributary, there's going to be what? Asphalt? Pavement?
Behind the planting area is
Away from the tributary?
Yes, away from the tributary is the parking lot.
Parking lot, all right. What's there right now?
In that area, it's a mixture of grasses and whatever was left over from when WashDOT used the site,
All right.
and invasive weeds.
And you would agree that that vegetated area that's there now is providing valuable buffer functions for the tributary, correct?
No.
You don't agree with that? Are you a fish biologist?
No.
All right. You agree that it is providing habitat for macroinvertebrates, for flying bugs?
Yes.
You agree that it's a source of detritus, organic material like dead leaves and bark and whatever that gets into the creek?
Kind of. It's just grass.
And you don't believe that that results in organic material washing into the tributary?
Oh, it does.
Right.
But not to the same extent that woody vegetation would.
Well, but but we're comparing a parking lot to what's there now. Nobody's talking about a forest, okay? Do you agree that what's there now provides a whole lot, infinitely more detritus and live bugs than pavement would provide?
I wouldn't characterize it as infinitely.
Almost, right? I mean, how much organic material?
Asked and answered. I mean,
Yeah, all right, you get the point. All right. So when I look at B16, which is your updated planting plan, and I look in the area where you say the level spreader's going to go, I don't see, and so I'm on page 2. Is that the right place to be to see what you're proposing to plant in that area?
I don't know what that reference is.
What page?
There's a second page of,
the exhibit?
yes, of B16.
Yeah, this one.
Sheet 2 of 13? Is that what
Sheet
you're
2 of, yes, sheet
Okay.
2, page 2 of 13.
This is the tree plan.
Is that the tree plan?
Yes.
So showing, maybe what, 1 or 2 trees at the far northeast end of that? Am I reading that right?
Correct.
And actually, it looks like, and those are in those little red boxes, is that right? I've blown mine up on a digital image, so it may not, I don't know what you're seeing on paper.
They're not red on mine, but
So I was provided a digital image by by the applicant's counsel. And does yours show the removal of a tree at that point as well?
yes, this is the plan that shows the removal of the existing trees and new proposed trees.
Right. So right in that corner, there's going to be 2 trees planted and 1 tree removed, is that right?
Correct.
You know how big the existing tree that's going to be removed is?
reading the plan correctly, it is a 35-inch black cottonwood.
So 35 inches meaning at what?
Diameter.
At chest height, diameter? So pretty substantial tree. Yes?
Yes.
And how large are the two trees that you're going to replace that mature tree with? How big are those?
One is a 2.5-inch caliper, and the other is a 2-inch caliper tree.
So about the size of a broomstick.
No, definitely larger than a broomstick.
Definitely larger. All right. It's a broomstick, 1 inch.
Yeah.
So, all right. And so you're going to replace this 35-inch tree. How tall would that be?
This
You know?
particular tree,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And how tall are these 2-inch caliper midgets that you're putting in?
Objection, characterization.
Yeah.
How
no
ma- how-
need,
how
Mr.
tall-
Brinkley,
how
and I
tall
know
are-
how you feel about
Right.
it, but I'm pretty
How
good
tall-
with heights
Yeah.
and understanding these things.
All right. How tall would you say these trees are that you're putting in?
Well, it's listed there. So the one is 12 feet tall, and the other one is 6 feet tall.
And then in the far east part of the property, southeast corner, still along the tributary margin, you're putting in, it looks like a number of black cherries in that area. Is that right? Where the, or what are they called? Bitter cherries.
Mhm.
Bitter cherries,
Yes.
where the property comes to a point, sort of. You're also removing trees in that area, right?
Correct.
So going back to where we started, where those two new trees are being put in, is it your opinion that those two new trees are providing more habitat value to the tributary than the tree that you're removing?
I can't speak specifically to the tree that we're removing, but over time, these trees will begin to provide habitat.
Certainly in the next decade, those two trees aren't going to be providing as much habitat value as the existing tree, right?
I suppose.
So you said that the existing site was compacted, but even though compacted, you would agree that it still is able to support vegetation, right?
Yes.
We saw, did you look at that series of not time lapse, but that time series of aerials and a couple of ground pictures?
Yeah, I've reviewed them.
Yeah. So some of those are showing areas that have been compacted and yet are still supporting vegetation, right?
Correct.
And I thought at one point you said that that it was only the margins of the property that were supporting vegetation, but actually a substantial portion of the property is supporting vegetation, isn't it?
I was referring specifically to invasive weeds or at the margins of the
Oh, all right.
blackberries.
Okay. And whether invasive or not, they still provide habitat value to the tributary, right?
I mean, I wouldn't characterize it that way.
You wouldn't? Well, don't you agree? I mean, don't flying insects hover around blackberry bushes?
Yes.
Don't blackberry bushes give off leaves and fall to the ground and, they end up in the creek?
They do all those things, but they also do a lot of terrible things. And so,
Okay. But in terms of feeding the creek, they do good things, right?
I suppose
Well, you suppose, or they do?
they do.
Were you just, I gather you don't know what the seed mixture was in the hydro seed that WashDOT put in, do you?
No.
So you'd just be speculating when you testified what you thought it might be?
Yes.
You testified at one point that your plantings would be a substantial improvement over what's there now. You were referring primarily to the North Fork, is that right?
Correct.
You don't have any experience in designing or installing level spreaders, do you?
I don't design the level spreader, but I've seen how they function, and I've monitored their functionality in during mitigation monitoring on sites.
All right. And when you testified that the WashDOT plantings were quite robust, were you talking along the North Fork again?
They've also done plantings along the ditch.
All right. Along the tributary?
Yes, the tributary.
You testified that the ornamental trees that you're planting would be a source of flying insects and stuff and detritus, I suppose, as well? Those are on the north side of the property, is that right? Most of the ornamentals by the entrance?
They're throughout the parking lot and along the street.
All right. Most of those are far removed from the tributary, right?
Yes.
Counsel for the city turned your attention to the mitigation condition number 1, that the 1A that says adjacent on-site planting areas shall be planted with a mixture of native shrubs and trees. As I understand it, your understanding is that that doesn't mandate your client to plant trees in that 6-foot strip along the tributary, right?
Objection
You're not-
mischaracterizes.
Well, I'm asking him if that is a correct characterization.
What is the objection?
He's saying a 6-foot. It ranges.
6 to 10 foot. Oops, thank you.
Okay, so
Yeah.
in the planning strip.
Right, in the
Okay.
planning strip.
There.
Thank you.
So one more, repeat the question,
What's the
take out
Yeah, I
the
will.
width.
Yeah, right.
Let's repeat the question.
So when I'm referring to the planting strip, I'm going to refer to that as strip that you described as 6 to 10 feet wide between the asphalt and the property line, right? In that planting strip, your understanding on behalf of your client is that you're not mandated to put in a mixture of native shrubs and trees there. Is that right?
We do have a mixture of shrubs and trees in the corner to the southwest.
Right. But along the general length of that strip, no. Is that right? Not going to put in trees and shrubs along there, right?
We're putting shrubs along
Excuse me,
there.
shrubs, but no trees.
No trees.
And no ground cover, is that what you said?
We do have ground cover in there. I misspoke earlier.
All right. And is the reason you're not putting trees in generally along the level spreaders because of the damage they might cause, the roots might do to the level spreader? That's the concern there?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So I have for this witness.
Any redirect?
Quickly, just to talk quickly about the WSDOT plantings along the ditch. What is your opinion about the WSDOT plantings along the ditch?
It's the same plantings that are along the North Fork, and it's a mixture of trees and shrubs, and they're growing robustly.
Okay. And will those trees and shrubs grow up to provide habitat for macroinvertebrates?
Yes.
You said that blackberries do a lot of terrible things. What do blackberries do that are terrible?
I think Mr. Taylor characterized them as forming monocultures and invading sites such that you have to remove them. They outcompete native trees and shrubs such that those trees and shrubs can't grow.
And are there a bunch of blackberry bushes that are growing along next to the ditch in the site area?
Yes.
And will those blackberry bushes be removed as part of this process?
The ones that are on our property, yes.
And the strip of land between the site and the WASDOT property, is that soil going to be augmented?
Yes.
And when you augment it, what do you do?
We typically decompact, till and compost, and then provide topsoil over the top of it.
Do you have any other questions?
Were those Himalayan blackberries, just to be clear, there was discussion of several potential types. Do you happen to know the answer to that?
Yes, they're Himalayan blackberries.
They're the characterized invasive as opposed to some other ones.
Yeah, there are native blackberries, but they typically, if they're trailing, they're low. These are definitely the invasive kind.
Great. Thank you for being here, Mr. Grunt.
Thank you.
Or Garf, I apologize.
No problem.
It's Garf, right?
It's Garf.
Okay, just wanted to be sure. And your next witness?
It's 12:10.
We just had a break. I was thinking,
I'm just thinking lunch. I don't.
okay, first off, how many more witnesses are you intending on calling?
I'm going to call 2 more definitely, and maybe a third.
Okay.
The third would be very short.
All right, what are the other parties thinking? Mr. Haney?
Well, given the testimony that was given earlier today, I'm not intending to present as many witnesses as I thought I was going to present. At this point, I will definitely be presenting 2 or 3, as opposed to, I doubt my stormwater folks will need to testify. I'm assuming Mr. Noel is going to present testimony regarding the flow spreader, and I doubt either Mr. Quinn or Mr. Schlepp will have to testify. So I think we're down to 3 or 4, 2 or 3 or 4. I'll just have to look, I think.
My concern, we just took a break.
I'm good to go a while longer.
Can we try to get through one more?
Sure,
witness,
sure. I don't have a
please?
problem.
Okay.
We're just typically around noon. There's a break, and whether we do it now or later. Call Mark Foster.
Okay.
Mike,
Mike
sorry.
Foster.
Forgot the Mikes and Marks. And can Mark be excused?
Sorry, Mark Garf can be excused. Yes. And thank you for being here, Mr. Foster. Do you swear affirm to tell the truth in any testimony you give here today?
I do.
Mr. Foster, could you please state your name for the record?
Mike Foster.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. Foster?
I'm a professional wetland scientist and a certified professional in erosion and sediment control, and I'm the applicant's biologist.
Okay, and what does a wetlands biologist do?
So I have a lot of experience delineating wetlands, delineating streams, and preparing mitigation restoration plans specifically for compensatory buffer mitigation or wetland restoration.
And does part of that analysis have to do with macroinvertebrates?
Yes, in general, we one of the functions that we target with mitigation planting is habitat, and part of habitat is mammals, birds, and macroinvertebrates.
And are you also familiar, is part of that habitat deal with fish?
Yes.
And how long have you been doing this?
13 years.
And how many other projects have you been involved with that relate to or touch on habitat for fish?
I would say between 50 and 100.
And what were your responsibilities with regard to this particular project?
So I was retained to prepare my staff were retained to prepare the tree retention and replacement plan and the critical area study, as well as some other supporting documents.
I want to ask you some questions about the current state of the site. Did you, as part of your expertise, looking at soil and the value of soil?
The interior of the site, we've talked about the field. The interior of the site is compacted, provides, as Mr. Garf stated, there's kind of a monoculture of grass, maybe a few other small forbs. But generally, the field is compacted and supporting a mix of grass and weeds, low grass and weeds.
And did you go out and try and dig in the field? I
did. Specifically into the southeast corner of the kennel. I took a shovel and with normal force tried to dig a hole. I could get the shovel down about 7 inches until I got refusal. Basically, I stand on the shovel and try to get it down, and it kind of refused at about 7 inches below ground surface. The soil is composed of sandy loam with cobble.
And have you walked the entire site?
I have walked the entire site.
Is there any gravel in the site?
There appeared to be a lot of gravel in where I dug.
Right. And why do you think the gravel was there?
It was part of the WashDOT construction project. There was machinery used to fill in the old alignment of the creek. There are wheel ruts still present in that field, so there were. It was to aid either the construction or driving on that site. And
when you say aid, make it so that the heavy equipment didn't sink into the ground.
That's typically how construction sites look. Yes.
Okay. Going back to when you dug in and you got 6 inches down, how in a non-degraded site, how far would you anticipate your shovel would go into the ground?
Well, it certainly varies depending on the substrate. I would anticipate an unimpacted site in the Pacific Northwest. Again, it varies, but generally it's fairly easy to get a shovel into the ground. So I'm a wetland biologist. I go out to a lot of wetland sites and have to dig test pits to a depth of 16 inches, which is the depth of the shovel. And generally, if you stand on the shovel, you can get the shovel to 16 inches without too much effort.
And what was the quality of the topsoil in this site?
So I was particularly interested in if there was an organic layer, meaning a layer above the mineral soil that had comprised of detritus in a various state of decomposition, and there was trace, if none, on top of that in that test pit.
And why is that important?
Well, the presence of organic matter, along with how compacted the soil is, affects how plant growth or plants develop. So plants prefer, in general, to have organic matter, and they prefer for the top 18 inches, which is kind of generally consists the biologically active portion of topsoil, needs to be decompacted to some degree. Certain specifications call for decompaction of soil to promote plant growth.
Okay. And what is your opinion about the quality of the field to generate plant growth?
I think it is both because it's compacted and there's, the seed source is, primarily grass, and we have the Himalayan blackberry in the margins. I think it's somewhat low.
Okay. And how does that impact the macroinvertebrate population?
So we've talked a lot about macroinvertebrates. I think that a grassy field doesn't provide good habitat for macroinvertebrates. In fact, the literature that Mr. Taylor cited in his report suggests that the most important factor in the presence and abundance and diversity of macroinvertebrates is having a mature forest. And a field is not a mature forest. And so my conclusion is that this field doesn't support a high abundance or diversity of stream macroinvertebrates that are important to salmon.
And you're basing this on the same study that Mr. Taylor cited in his opinion?
I am.
And what study was that?
That was the 2014 Swinney and Newbold study.
And again, Swinney and Newbold based their opinion on the importance of macroinvertebrates on what?
The presence of mature
Mature forest. Is there any mature forest on this site?
No. However, there are some mature trees, I should say. There's some mature trees, but the mature forest that they describe in the paper, no.
Okay. Now, I'm asking you to look at Exhibit 19, or B19.
Yes.
What is that?
This is a letter that I prepared evaluating, in general, functions provided by riparian areas. So areas that border water courses. This is an evaluation of what functions are important to salmon life cycle, and to evaluate the current condition of the site through the lens of what those values are.
Okay. And were you comparing the current condition of the site to the entire development when it was completed?
Correct.
Okay. And not just a paved parking lot?
Right.
All right. And it's your understanding that it's not just a paved parking lot. There's going to be plantings throughout the site. Is that right?
Absolutely. There will be not only parking islands and frontages that will be planted, but there's a 50-foot wide portion of the field that would be turned into a mitigation planting area that Mr. Garf alluded to, planted with a diverse mix of ground cover shrubs and trees.
Okay. Now, you discussed microinvertebrates on page 5 of your report in the large woody debris recruitment section. Is that accurate?
Correct.
And why did you discuss it in that section?
Large woody debris is important for macroinvertebrate life cycles. Replacing large woody debris recruitment is important for salmon habitat. So that's why I discussed it in the LWD recruitment section of my study, or my paper.
Okay. And why didn't you have a section on the grassy field and microinvertebrates in this letter?
Well, it goes back to, you're right, I didn't include it because the field was in such a poor and I'll use the term again. It's degraded. Just it's an old construction staging area, and in my opinion, did not provide important macroinvertebrate habitat.
And was that your thinking at the time you wrote this letter?
It was.
Is that still your opinion?
It is.
After listening to Mr. Taylor's testimony and considering the other evidence, is that still your opinion?
It is. It's, like I mentioned, supported by the 2014 study.
When and I'll ask you to look at B17, which are the
Sure.
images you've looked through.
You bet.
And if you can just spin
Flip
through
through.
those,
You bet.
and then I'll ask you some questions about them.
What was the number, sir?
B17, the aerial photos.
Okay. Flip through 'em.
On the time study or the time lapse of those pictures, what does that tell you about the site? if
Sure.
anything?
So I'm looking at the aerial imagery that extends from 2007 through to 2018. In the first couple of aerial images, I see unidentified material staged, specifically in the 2009 aerial image, and there are wheel tracks in the location of what was and what is now the field. 2010, I do see vegetation, some grassy vegetation growing in the field, but still wheel tracks. 2017, it looks like the development of a construction staging area for what would become that washed-out project. I see soil or gravel or some aggregate, something's stored near 230th Avenue Southeast. And if you flip to 2018, it's after as the washed-out project is closing out. It looks like the field had been regraded, and there's some amount of vegetation on it. I also assume that was hydroseeded or seeded somehow.
And I want to thank you. I want to ask you some questions about the level spreader, not in the level spreader, but the water that's going to be going through the level spreader.
Yeah.
Is it treated somehow?
It is. Mr. Bradley will speak more about this too, but it absolutely, the rainwater that hits what will be the future parking lot would be directed away from the critical area buffer on the north, away from the tributary to the south, and collected into detention vaults to achieve some sort of quiescent time. Sediment would fall out, and then it's run through an ecology-approved, and again, I'm sorry if I'm getting these details wrong, but some sort of ecology-approved filter that strips out or reduces pollutants, and then discharges it to the filter. So the whole system is designed to reduce pollution.
Okay. And is pollution a significant negative impact on fish?
As Mr. Taylor testified, sedimentation in fish-bearing watercourses can be potentially harmful. So yes, fine sediment that comes off construction sites can be damaging
Right.
to water resources.
And this would eliminate all of that, this
It
project?
would certainly bring it down to acceptable levels. Yes.
And would
can
you
I
agree?
proceed?
Go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt.
To that point, I think right now, an unconsolidated field with vegetation that's not. Yes, it would bring it down to low levels, non-harmful levels.
So it would be better than it is now.
Yes. Right now we have a field that has no stormwater management built into it. We have a field with some sparse grass. It's thick in some places, sparse in others.
It's not a wetland,
No.
this field. And wetlands provide protection for streams, right?
In general, yes.
And isn't the number one threat of salmon the pollution that goes in the water?
Yes.
And so this would be reducing that number one threat to salmon.
Yes.
I don't have any other questions.
Mr. Haney?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Foster, I just wanted to ask you just a couple of questions about the macroinvertebrates. You said that you considered macroinvertebrates in your preparation of the September 25, 2019 study. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that study was specifically regarding the evaluation of impacts on the tributary. If I could, you're welcome to turn to it.
Why don't you turn to it?
Yes, I believe that was the framework, yes.
Okay.
Is this a read?
And with respect to your conclusions, I think you said that you didn't see, well, let me just ask you, did you reach a conclusion as to whether or not there would be a significant reduction in macroinvertebrate food sources as the result of this project?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, was you asking him his opinion or whether it was
I'm
expressed in the
asking whether he
document?
reached an opinion as to that.
In a document he prepared himself.
Well,
Right.
those are two different things.
Okay, so I understand. A, what document are we referencing?
B19.
Well, I am
Are you referencing something different?
No, I am representing,
It's the same document.
it's the same document. I'm looking at City's Exhibit C1D, which was attached. This was an attachment to the DNS, but I believe it's also the same document.
It is, right? It's a letter from September 25th, 2019?
Yes.
Okay, so we're on the same page as to what document this is, and this is a document that Mr. Foster himself wrote.
Yes.
Okay, so he's testifying about a document he himself wrote, so I don't think
With
it's
it.
an opinion about a document he wrote. He's telling us about
Yep.
the document.
I'm with him.
Okay, good.
Okay, so let me back up then. I believe your testimony, you said that on page 5 of that document, there is a section on large woody debris recruitment.
Correct.
And that is where you dealt with or considered macroinvertebrates, is that correct?
I considered macroinvertebrates, correct.
And at the end of that section, you say, quote, as such, the project has no significant adverse impact on LWD recruitment in the tributary. Was your conclusion there limited was your conclusion limited to large woody debris recruitment?
That was the main thrust of my analysis.
So how did you consider macroinvertebrates in that section?
Macroinvertebrates benefit from the presence of large woody debris.
And do you have an opinion as to whether or not this project will result in a significant reduction in macroinvertebrates in this area?
I have an opinion.
And on what could you base that opinion?
I based my opinion on the proposed mitigation involving the planting plan that Mr. Garf has proposed, the placement of large woody debris, and then the scientific evidence that's been incorporated into the record.
And what is that opinion, Mr. Foster?
I do not believe that there will be a reduction in the presence of macroinvertebrates.
And can you give us just a brief explanation of why you don't believe that will be the case?
Yes, I think I alluded to this earlier, but the mitigation plan that Mr. Garf has prepared, that the applicant has prepared, will the planting palette will, in several years, achieve a diverse mix of trees, shrubs, ground cover that the scientific literature shows that is beneficial to macroinvertebrates that are important for streams.
Now, is there anything that Mr. Taylor obviously does not share that opinion.
Correct.
Is there anything that he testified to this morning that causes you to rethink your conclusion?
It doesn't. I felt like his opinion was somewhat unsubstantiated.
Can you explain that, what you mean by that?
He said that half of the organic material that is important for the stream comes from the field, and I think that the scientific literature says that that's not the case. I didn't see any testimony or evidence that shows that a former construction staging area that has a monoculture of low grasses provides significant organic matter.
Okay, now, in answering my question, you spoke about organic matter, and I was speaking earlier about, or asking you earlier about macroinvertebrates.
Right.
Are the two related in some way?
Yeah, and I'm borrowing Mr. Taylor's testimony where he says organic matter can be live or dead organic matter. So yes, I apologize. I was using an umbrella term.
So is the conclusion you gave me in response to my question that you didn't see a significant reduction in macroinvertebrate as a result of this project? Does that also apply to other types of organic matter?
Correct.
I have no further questions.
Great. Cross-examination.
Mr. Foster, Dave Bricklin, I'm representing the Issaquah Environmental Council.
That's me.
Nice to meet you. At the end there, you said that you thought Mr. Taylor had testified that that the nutrients from this field were providing half of the nutrients to the tributary. Is that right?
That's what I understood him to say.
And you think that's overstated?
I do.
And do you remember, or did you understand that what he was testifying to was whether this site was, as compared to the rest of the drainage feeding this tributary, what the opportunities were for macroinvertebrates and leaf fall to enter into the tributary elsewhere?
Yes.
So like upstream from here a little bit, you're immediately onto the Cadman property, right? Gravel pit?
Immediately.
Well, almost immediately? Across the street?
Yeah.
Right. So first you come to a street,
Sure.
and then you come to a gravel pit, right? Any nutrients getting into the creek out of that gravel pit or off the street?
No.
Right.
No, you're very, very minimal, if any. You're correct.
Right. And so when and downstream from here, there's another street, right? And then very quickly after that, the tributary flows into the North Fork, right?
Correct.
So, and south of the tributary, you have a 12-lane or something interstate highway, right?
Yes.
So when
It's 12, but yeah.
whatever. Well, with ramps and everything,
Yeah.
I'm thinking express lanes. So when Mr. Taylor testified that maybe half of the production of nutrients coming into this tributary in the immediate area is coming from the Evergreen Ford property on the north side, you still think that that was a misstatement on his part?
My understanding was that he was speaking about the field.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Isn't the Evergreen property basically a field?
Most of it.
All right. So whether you call it the Evergreen property or the field, whatever you call it, don't you agree with them really that probably half of the nutrients reaching this tributary in this immediate area are coming from that property?
I still don't agree with him.
And where do you think they're coming from then?
There are, I think if you look at the area, there are large trees upstream and trees and shrubs in the washed-out mitigation planting area that likely have more of an effect.
You say large trees upstream. Where are you talking about?
In the washed-out area, in the washed-out right-of-way,
Right.
there are trees. I shouldn't say all large trees, but there are some lower, small to medium trees, and then some large trees upstream as well.
So
Will not be impacted by the project.
Right. So I gather Mr. Taylor was saying, maybe half of the production comes from the Evergreen Ford side of the line, maybe half comes from the narrower but closer to the creek, or the tributary washed-out side of the line. You're saying you don't think it's about a 50-50 split. You think somewhat more comes from the washed-out side of the line, somewhat less from the Evergreen Ford side of the line?
I guess I didn't.
Where you don't really have enough information to know?
I don't have enough information to know.
All right. Are you aware of anybody at the city having more information about this than you did?
No.
So they were just as much in the dark as you were. Is that right?
Speculation.
I'm asking them. Did you have opportunities to talk with the city? Have you ever had any conversations with the city staff about this?
What matter?
With regard to this project?
In regards specifically to macroinvertebrates?
Well, let me just start with this project generally.
Yes, I've spoken to city staff in general.
Did you ever talk to them about macroinvertebrates?
No.
Yes or no?
No.
And how about the dead nutrients? Talk about
Not
that
specifically.
either? All right. So when council asked you about your opinions regarding macroinvertebrates or the leaf fall, the other nutrients, whatever you testified here to the examiner, these aren't any thoughts that were ever conveyed by you to the city, right?
Correct.
You're not aware of anybody else who conveyed any of this kind of information to the city, are you?
Anybody else who conveyed this information to the city?
Right. Nobody else you were talking to said, don't bother talking to the city about this. I already told them that.
Correct.
You testified that the plantings in several years would be, the plantings that you're proposing to put in would be diverse and beneficial. And I think you said they would be better in terms of the reduction of pollutants than what's there now. Is that right?
Yes.
And so putting the plants in as a filtering mechanism, if you will, so you're saying that after the project goes in, there'll be a better filter there than there is right now. Is that right?
I don't know if I said those specific words.
But is that what you were inferring or not? Maybe I misunderstood.
I think you've hit on what, how buffers protect water quality in general.
Right.
Those are some of the values that we try to build into
Yeah.
mitigation sites. So I think you've hit something that I wouldn't disagree with.
All right. I thought that's what you were testifying to. Maybe it wasn't.
I'm not objecting to what you're telling me. I guess.
I
I'm not
thought
trying to be
that
difficult.
was what you had already testified to. Maybe you didn't.
Okay. I don't have any problem with it.
All right. You said you had assumed that WashDOT, when they were done, hydroseeded the site or put in some other types of seeding, right?
Correct.
as I asked the prior witness, I know you were here before, you don't actually know what type of seating the WSDOT put in, do you?
That's correct. I don't.
So you don't have any opinion regarding the suitability of the seating WSDOT put in for the providing habitat for macroinvertebrates, do you?
Compared to other seeding mixes?
Right.
No.
You testified several times that the site in its current condition would not provide as much habitat value as a forest, right?
I think that's correct.
And you referred to the Sweeney 2014 literature review to support that statement, right?
Yes.
Is there? But I thought you were also saying, perhaps, maybe I misunderstood, that the 2014 Sweeney study supports your view that the current property wouldn't provide any value at all for macroinvertebrates or other nutrients.
I don't think that's what I said.
Not what you meant to
No,
say?
that's not what I
may have
intended to say.
misunderstood. So you're not, you recognize that the property as in its current condition does provide a source of both alive and dead nutrients to the creek and to the tributary, right?
Sure.
And there's nothing in the 2014 Sweeney literature review that would be inconsistent with that statement, right?
Correct.
So what were you citing that 2014 study for?
So
Well, let me, just to make this quick, you were citing it for the proposition that a forest would be an even better source for nutrients than a grass field, right?
that's what the literature suggests.
Right. And that's what Mr. Taylor said too, wasn't it?
I don't recall him saying that specifically.
All right. But he didn't say anything inconsistent with that, did he? I mean, he didn't claim, did you hear him? Did you
No,
think
I
so?
don't. So I don't think.
Right.
Correct.
All right. So wasn't his point that, forget about a forest, because there's no forest there now. He was just looking at what's there now and saying that an auto dealership is going to eliminate the habitat value that's provided by the grass field. Wasn't that the gist of his testimony?
I think that was his direct comparison. Correct.
Yeah.
He was.
And there's nothing in the 2014 Sweeney study that would suggest that was incorrect, was it?
Correct.
Because I remember, I thought your words were almost, well, citing the exact same study that he cited, I come to a different conclusion. But his conclusion was, citing that study, that the grass field was going to provide nutrient value to the creek. And I guess I don't understand what you see in that study that was inconsistent with that.
Is there?
Can you
Yeah,
point?
what is the
Can you
question?
point me to something in the study that's inconsistent with his opinion?
So. His conclusion was. His conclusion was that the grass field provided a substantial food source for the creek, and I don't think that the Sweeney study supports that.
Does the Sweeney study say that's not right? Or did it just not address it?
No, but I think that
Which was it?
He
Where
can
are you-
answer.
where are you going with this?
Well, I mean,
And
it's
let
one
him
big-
answer
big-
when you ask a question.
Right, because it's one thing to say that Sweeney didn't address the issue. It's another thing to say that Sweeney addressed the issue and reached a conclusion different than what Mr. Taylor thought they were saying. So I'm asking, which of those two do you think is the case?
Sweeney points to the fact that mature forests are beneficial for macroinvertebrates that are beneficial to salmon. And I think that the comparison is to this field. And we're taking a portion of this field that is near the North Fork Issaquah Creek and planting a forest. So I think that's where my argument lies, is that we're developing a forest out of what is currently a field.
Okay, that helps a lot. How about, let me shift your attention from the North Fork over to the tributary. You're not planting a forest there, are you?
No.
You're putting in two-inch trees. True?
That's
True? In terms of
misstated.
true?
I don't have the planting plan in front of me, so I'm not trying to be difficult. I don't have.
Okay,
the
that was the prior witness. That's fine.
Okay.
So, but in any event, is there anything in the Sweeney study, I'm going to ask that question again, is there anything in the Sweeney study relative to the tributary that suggests that Mr. Taylor was wrong when he said that the existing conditions are providing nutrients to the tributary?
No.
Thank you. And along the same lines, you described the current conditions as including compacted soil, limited topsoil, ruts, gravel, a variety of conditions that you summed up it with the word degraded, right? Is that right?
Correct.
But despite those degraded characteristics, you agree with Mr. Taylor that the site is still an area that produces nutrients for the tributary, right?
Correct.
And so your only difference of opinion with Mr. Taylor is where he characterizes the site as being maybe 50% of the production of nutrients for the tributary. You think it's some lesser percentage, but you don't know what that lesser percentage is. Is that a fair summary?
Yes. Pardon me. Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have. Oh, excuse me. Let me just check. All right, that's all. Thank you.
Any redirect?
Quickly, thank you for your patience. The Sweeney report, Mr. Birkeland asked you a lot of questions about that. And the issue in your mind isn't that the Sweeney report doesn't provide any substance for Mr. Taylor's opinion.
Correct.
And so your point in referencing the Sweeney report is that the report Mr. Taylor relied on provided no foundation for his expert opinion
That is absolutely correct.
after you read the report. And
Before you ask another question, may I just ask from the examiner? Before you ask another question.
Is there an objection?
Yeah,
Make an objection if there's an objection, but we're not going to go back and forth for 6 hours on the Sweeney report.
Right. I
Okay.
get that. I know you're, as examiners typically are lenient about leading questions, but I would ask that during.
I've been a little too lenient, I'd say, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my point. Especially on redirect, I would ask that maybe leading questions not be not be quite so generous with leading questions on redirect.
Make an objection or not.
I will. Well, when the
Okay.
next question's asked.
Moving on.
All right.
I guess we shouldn't be hypocritical about that process. He asked a ton of leading questions.
I'm
on
well
redirect.
aware. I'm just trying to get through this
Sure,
with
I'm
you.
trying to go through it as fast as possible. That's
Yeah.
why I asked the questions the way I did. Mr. Birkeland asked you questions about whether you provided any information to the city regarding the macroinvertebrates and the habitats around the ditch.
Mhm.
You remember those questions?
Yes, I do.
And were you one of the authors in the September 25th letter that is Exhibit B-19?
I was the sole author of this.
And did you send
No,
that to the city?
I was one of the authors, yes. Yes, I did.
Okay. And so that was, and did you have any discussions with the watershed over that letter.
Yes.
All right. And what is the watershed's relationship to the city you're aware of?
The watershed company is the city's on-call consultant providing biological review function.
Mr. Brickland talked about two sources for the water that comes into the ditch, the Cadman and the neighboring property. Is there another source that provides water to the ditch?
I don't have the map in front of me, so
Do you recall whether the Highlands storm system provides any water to the ditch?
I believe it does.
Okay. And we'll get into the percentage of how much it provides, but would the Highlands storm system have organic material in it that came down?
Yes.
Why?
Well, things that fall into that storm system can still pass through those systems. There's no, to my knowledge, no reason organic matter would be filtered out.
Okay. I think I'm done.
Great, thank you. Are you planning on calling further witnesses?
Yes.
You are, okay.
Yeah, we haven't addressed the level spreader yet.
Okay, so then at that point, I guess we will take a break for lunch. We'll come back, hopefully plow through the rest of the witnesses.
Sure, how long?
Let's see, so it's right 5 to 1, half hour, certainly no more than a half hour.
1:30?
Yeah, let's say try to be back a bit before 1:30 so we can dive right in at 1:30. Great, thank you.
Better accessible.